The click of the gun's safety switching off was the first sound I heard as Emily pointed it straight at me, her eyes filled with a fury I'd never seen before. She wasn't the woman I'd married, not anymore. Standing next to her was Steve, her lover, smirking as if he owned my life, his fingers casually draped around her waist. "Nervous, Nick?" she sneered, her voice dripping with a cruel confidence that sent a chill down my spine. There I was, pinned to my own chair in my own home, a gun aimed at my chest by my own wife. I didn't recognize the woman in front of me, didn't know the man smirking at my expense, but I could feel my world cracking wide open, right there. "Hand over the account passwords." "Now," she demanded, leaning closer, pressing the gun harder into my chest. Her eyes flashed with something almost like glee as she tightened her grip, while Steve watched with that smug, arrogant look that made my blood boil. "You really think I'd go along with this?" I asked, my voice steady even though my mind was racing. "You think I didn't see this coming?" For a second, her face twisted in shock, but she covered it quickly with another sneer. "What do you mean, you saw this coming? You think I didn't notice the late nights, the cold shoulder, the secrets?" "I knew, Emily. I knew about you and your boyfriend here," I said, my gaze locking on Steve, who shifted uncomfortably for a moment. Emily's smirk faltered, her fingers twitching on the gun, but she quickly regained her composure. "Doesn't matter. You're giving us everything now, and if you don't cooperate, well," she raised the gun a little higher, her intent clear. But she had no idea that I'd been preparing for this moment, that every word, every glance, every plan she thought was hers was about to fall apart. My eyes stayed on Emily as I sat there, my face calm but my mind racing. She and her lover thought they had the upper hand. They thought I'd buckle under the pressure, hand over my life to them with a terrified yes. But she had underestimated me, they both had. I'd seen her betrayal coming from miles away, and while she thought she was manipulating me, I was laying the groundwork for a trap of my own. I had to play it cool. "All right," I said, sighing as though I'd given up, letting my shoulders slump just a bit to sell the act. "You want the account passwords? The documents? Fine. But you won't get a cent if you shoot me." I saw a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, and that was all I needed to keep the charade going. Steve stepped forward, his face inches from mine, the stench of cheap cologne mixed with overconfidence radiating from him. "Listen here, pal. You don't get to make demands. Emily and we're taking what we want, and there's nothing you can do about it." His smile was a mixture of smug satisfaction and the sadistic glee of a man who thought he'd already won. I knew then that Steve was nothing more than a pawn in Emily's game, a disposable thrill, someone she'd picked up for the high of the betrayal, not because he had anything special to offer. But for now, I played along, letting them think they held all the power. Emily stepped back, waving the gun like it was a magic wand that would make all her problems disappear. She seemed more excited than nervous, as if the sheer audacity of the moment thrilled her. "Get up, Nick. We're going to the safe, and you're going to give me everything in it." I forced myself to look defeated, standing up slowly, my hands raised. I led them down the hallway to my office, where the safe was hidden behind a painting. As we walked, my mind worked double time. I couldn't let them leave with everything I had worked for, everything I'd built. They wanted to take my life apart, but they'd have to fight me for it. In my office, I watched Emily's gaze dart around, her eyes gleaming with a cold satisfaction that I hadn't seen in all our years together. She thought she'd won. I wanted to let her believe that for just a bit longer. "Open it," she barked, gesturing to the safe. As I punched in the code, I could feel Steve's eyes burning into the back of my head, eager to see my life spill out for him to pick apart. I took my time, pretending to fumble with the combination, feeling their impatience mount. It was all part of the plan. The safe door swung open, revealing stacks of documents, my passport, a few bundles of cash. I turned to Emily, letting my voice tremble slightly as I said, "This is all I have. Just, please don't do anything reckless." Emily laughed, a harsh, unrecognizable sound that bounced off the walls. "Reckless? You have no idea, Nick. I've been waiting for this moment, dreaming of it. Do you know how boring you became? You think this is reckless? No, this is freedom." That stung. After years of loyalty, of doing everything I could to build a life together, this was how she saw me. Boring. Predictable. The words seared into me, but I swallowed my pride, channeling the pain into a calm I didn't even know I could muster. Steve pushed past me, stuffing his pockets with the bundles of cash and flipping through the documents like a kid in a candy store. I let him have his moment, knowing it wouldn't last. Emily leaned against the desk, inspecting her handiwork, that twisted grin still plastered across her face. She thought she was rid of me. She thought she'd won. But I had spent too long watching, waiting, and preparing for exactly this moment. I took a deep breath, letting the final piece of my plan settle into place. "You know, Emily, I could have made this easy for you. But you didn't just want to leave, you wanted to destroy everything." I let my words hang in the air, watching her expression shift as she began to realize something was off. Steve looked up, catching the tension in the room. "What's he talking about, Em?" Emily's face hardened, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Ignore him, Steve. He's just trying to scare us." I couldn't help but smirk. "Oh, I'm not trying to scare you, Emily. I just think you should know that this wasn't your plan, and it sure as hell isn't going to be your victory." Before she could respond, I pressed the hidden button on the underside of the desk. Instantly, the room locked down, the heavy steel door sliding into place behind us, sealing all three of us inside. Emily's eyes widened in shock as she realized she'd walked straight into a trap. "What the hell did you just do, Nick?" Her voice was frantic, her grip on the gun faltering as the walls closed in. "I told you, Emily," I replied, my voice steady now, the fear gone, replaced by the satisfaction of watching her panic. "You think you're the one holding the cards, but I've been preparing for this day a lot longer than you realize." Steve pounded on the door, his face draining of color as he tried to make sense of the situation. Emily whirled around, her composure unraveling, her hands shaking. You can't do this," she shrieked, her face twisting in disbelief. "Oh, I can, Emily." And I did. I leaned back, savoring the moment, feeling a strange sense of justice as I looked at the two of them, trapped in the very room they had intended to steal from me. They thought they could take everything, but they had no idea what kind of hell they'd walked into. The air in the room grew heavy as the realization set in. Emily's face was a mask of disbelief, her eyes darting from the locked door to the gun in her hand, as if it might somehow free them. Steve, on the other hand, looked like a trapped animal, pacing around, clawing at the walls, pounding on the steel door in desperation. Each dull thud of his fists only deepened the silence that swallowed their confidence. "Nick," Emily hissed, her voice strained with a hint of pleading that she hadn't shown before. "Open this door. Right now." I shook my head, letting a slow, controlled smile cross my face. "What's the rush, Emily? You wanted me here, wanted me to watch as you tore my life apart. Isn't this what you wanted, a little more excitement? A little more danger?" Her face twisted in anger, and she raised the gun again, pointing it directly at me, but this time, her hand wasn't as steady. "Let us out of here, Nick. Right now. Or so help me, I'll..." "You'll what? Shoot me?" I took a step closer, feeling the fear ebb away as I watched her unravel. "Go ahead. Pull the trigger. But that's not going to unlock the door. It's not going to get you a cent, and it's not going to make me open that safe." She glanced at Steve, looking for some form of assurance, but he was still fumbling with his phone, desperately trying to get a signal in the thick, locked-down room. His usual cockiness had disappeared, replaced with the wide-eyed panic of a man way out of his depth. "Signal won't work in here," I said calmly, watching his face fall. "This room is soundproofed, signal blocked, locked tight. You're in my world now." Emily's face contorted in rage, her hands shaking as she clutched the gun, each second making her more uncertain, more vulnerable. I could see her cracking, the confidence she'd displayed earlier fading like a cheap mask. "How long, Nick?" she spat, her eyes narrowing as she fought to regain control. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I replied, the words clipped and cold. "Long enough to watch you lie to my face, to see you walk through our home like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. And the whole time, you thought you were being so clever. Thought you'd get away with it, didn't you?" She clenched her jaw, the venom in her gaze returning. "You were never supposed to know. I was going to leave, take what I deserved, and finally get away from this boring, pathetic life you call a marriage. You brought this on yourself, Nick. You never knew how to make me happy." I felt a pang of bitterness at her words, the twisted, cold reality of how little I'd ever really known her. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I'd built my life around, and she'd felt nothing but contempt. But that bitterness only fueled my resolve. "Oh, I know that now," I said, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. "I know exactly what you are, Emily. And now, so do you." Steve finally turned, his frustration boiling over. "Enough with this mind game crap, Nick. Just open the door and let us out. This whole thing," he gestured wildly around him. "This is insane." I looked him over, noting the panic in his eyes, the sweat beading on his forehead. "Insane?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You came into my home, with my wife, holding a gun to my head, and you want to talk about insanity?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Instead, he just stared at me, his confidence shattered, his bravado reduced to ashes. Emily, sensing her plan falling apart, tried to pull herself together, but the cracks were showing. "Nick," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "We can work this out. I didn't mean for it to go this way. It was supposed to be simple. A clean break. You're making this harder than it has to be." I shook my head slowly, marveling at her audacity. "A clean break? Emily, you waltzed in here with a gun, threatened my life, and you have the nerve to ask for a clean break? No, you wanted war. And now you've got it." I let that sink in, watching the reality dawn on her. She knew she'd lost control of this situation. She'd overplayed her hand, and now, for once, she was at my mercy. Steve spoke up again, his voice more desperate now. "Look, Nick, whatever went on between you two, that's not my business. Just open the door, all right? We'll leave. You'll never see us again. Just let us out, man." I met his gaze, my expression unyielding. "You think it's that easy, Steve? Just walk out, scot-free? You waltzed in here to destroy my life. You wanted to strip me of everything I've built, everything that matters to me. And now, you think I'm just going to let you walk away?" Emily's hands were shaking now, her face pale as she began to see the situation for what it truly was, a trap, her trap, turned against her. "What are you going to do?" she whispered, fear finally seeping into her voice. "You can't keep us here forever." I took a step back, watching them both with a calm detachment that surprised even me. "No, Emily, I can't keep you here forever. But I can make sure you understand what betrayal really feels like. You thought you could take everything from me, but you'll walk out of here with nothing. No money, no power over me. Nothing." I could see the panic rise in her, her composure shattering as the reality of her actions hit home. For the first time, she looked truly afraid, and that fear was a strange comfort, a reminder that she was human, vulnerable, that she had something to lose. I turned away from them, heading towards the intercom system connected to my office, and activated the button that would alert the security company I had hired in secret. They'd arrive soon enough, and Emily and Steve would finally have to face the consequences of their betrayal. "Nick, wait," she called out, her voice breaking as she dropped the gun onto the floor, her once icy stare now replaced with desperation. "Please, let's talk this through. I made a mistake." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. This was no longer her game, and her lies no longer held power over me. Emily's voice echoed in the locked room, pleading with a desperation I'd never expected to hear from her. The cold, calculating woman who had walked in with a gun was gone, replaced by someone who realized too late that she had lost. Steve paced the floor, looking from me to Emily with wide, frantic eyes, his confidence shattered. "Please, Nick," Emily said, her voice softening, taking on an edge of panic. "We don't have to end it like this. We can go back to how things were. Just let us go, and we'll disappear. No one has to know about any of this." The irony of her words made me laugh, a dark, bitter sound that hung heavy in the air. "You're asking for forgiveness now? After you marched in here, threatened me, took everything we built together, and tried to rip it apart in front of me? And you expect me to just let you go?" Steve stepped forward, his hands up in a defensive gesture. "Look, Nick. Let's be real here. This whole thing got a little out of hand, all right? No one needs to get hurt. Just let us walk away, and you can keep whatever you've got left. We're not greedy." "Not greedy?" I echoed, shaking my head in disbelief. "You came here for everything. My home, my money, my life. You two didn't care what you left me with. You wanted to tear me apart and walk away without a second thought. And now you're bargaining?" Steve swallowed, his bravado evaporating with each word. "Look, man. Emily, she said you wouldn't see it coming. Said you wouldn't fight back. This whole thing was her idea. I just went along because," he trailed off, realizing too late that throwing Emily under the bus wasn't the smartest move. Emily's face twisted in fury, her eyes shooting daggers at him. "You coward," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You said you'd handle this, that we'd be out of here by now. Now you're blaming me because your plan fell apart?" "My plan?" he fired back, his own anger bubbling over. "You're the one who cooked this whole thing up. You wanted it all, and I was stupid enough to follow along. Don't pretend you didn't." "Enough." I cut in, watching them turn on each other like rats in a cage. Their unity was crumbling faster than I could have imagined. It was almost pathetic to see how quickly they abandoned loyalty when faced with a bit of pressure. Emily's attention snapped back to me, her face a mixture of desperation and regret. "Nick, please. We can figure something out. I'll leave, and you can keep the house, the accounts. I'll sign anything you want. Just open the door. Let us go, and I'll disappear from your life." The nerve. After everything, she wanted me to believe her? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my own anger in check. "You really think you can lie your way out of this? After everything?" Her shoulders slumped, her desperation shifting into something darker. "You're a fool, Nick," she said, the cold edge returning to her voice. "You're weak. That's why this happened. You let me walk all over you because you thought I'd stay loyal. But you were never enough for me. And if you think this little stunt is going to change that, you're delusional." I watched her, letting her words roll over me, no longer stinging like they once would have. This was Emily at her most honest, cruel, ruthless, a woman who saw people as pawns to be used and discarded. And it was that honesty, twisted as it was, that finally made everything clear. "Maybe I was a fool," I said quietly. "Maybe I was weak. But right now, I'm the one with the power. And you're the one locked in here with no way out. Steve, visibly rattled, tried a new tactic. Come on, Nick. You got your revenge, all right? You showed us who's boss. Just open the door, and we'll go. We'll disappear from your life. We'll never come back. I could hear the fear in his voice, the desperation of a man who knew he was trapped and was looking for any way out. It almost amused me, seeing him scramble for an escape, realizing he wasn't the master manipulator he thought he was. Just then, the faint sound of sirens echoed outside, growing louder with each passing second. Emily's face turned white as the noise registered, and Steve's panicked expression became almost comical. What did you do? Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at her calmly, letting her feel the weight of her own actions. I called security. They'll be here any minute, and they'll make sure you answer for every single thing you did here tonight. No, she hissed, backing away from me, her eyes darting to Steve as if he might somehow come up with a way out. You can't do this, Nick. You're going to ruin everything. She reached out, grabbing Steve's arm, her fingers digging into his skin as she clung to him, desperate and terrified. For a brief moment, her icy facade was gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered fear. She had lost, and she knew it. Steve, still trying to process what was happening, began to shake his head, his voice shaky. You set us up, Nick. This whole time, you knew we'd try something, and you just let it happen. I nodded, feeling a calmness wash over me as I watched them realize their defeat. That's right. I knew, and I waited. You thought you'd take everything from me, leave me with nothing. But now, you're the ones who have nothing. Nothing but each other. Emily's eyes narrowed, her fear turning back into rage. You'll pay for this, Nick. I swear, you'll regret this. I shook my head, smiling faintly. No, Emily. I think the only regret in this room belongs to you. The sirens grew louder, stopping just outside the house, followed by the sound of car doors slamming. Heavy footsteps echoed up the walkway, each one a countdown to the end of her twisted game. Emily's face turned pale, her once confident smirk replaced with sheer terror as she realized her fate was sealed. I walked to the door, pressing the release to let the security team in. The door swung open, and two uniformed officers stepped in, their eyes scanning the room, taking in the scene in an instant. There they are, I said calmly, gesturing to Emily and Steve, who were still frozen in shock. They broke in, threatened me, tried to take everything I have. I'll let you take it from here. Emily looked at me one last time, her expression a mixture of hatred and desperation. Nick, please. But I had no sympathy left for her. She had made her choice, and now she would face the consequences. The officers led her and Steve out, their protests fading as they were escorted down the hallway. As they disappeared through the door, I felt an unexpected lightness settle over me. The weight of betrayal, the anger, the bitterness, it all began to dissolve, replaced by a strange sense of peace. They were gone, and for the first time, I was free. As the door closed behind the officers and their captives, silence filled the room. I stood there for a moment, feeling the lingering remnants of adrenaline in my veins, a steady hum that was already beginning to fade. It was over. They were gone, taken away in handcuffs, leaving me in the quiet aftermath of their betrayal. But despite everything that had happened, the house didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt like a battlefield, each room holding a memory of Emily's deception, each hallway echoing with the lies she'd spun. I took a slow breath, trying to process everything. Part of me still couldn't believe that Emily, my wife, the woman I'd once trusted with my entire heart, had betrayed me so completely, so ruthlessly. She hadn't just wanted to leave, she wanted to destroy me, take everything I'd worked for, as if our marriage had meant nothing to her. All those years we'd spent together, the promises we'd made, had any of it ever been real? Or had I just been a convenient step for her, a pawn in some twisted game she was always playing? I walked into the living room, still feeling the coldness of her betrayal settling in, and sank into the couch. The silence in the house felt oppressive, a reminder of the emptiness she had left behind. For a long time, I sat there, replaying every moment of the past few months, looking for the signs I'd missed, the clues that should have warned me. They were all there, hidden in the small, careless lies she told, the brief flashes of irritation when I asked her about her late nights, the way she'd pulled away little by little, replacing affection with distance. I had ignored those signs, blinded by love or perhaps just by habit, by the belief that we were in this together, even when everything else suggested otherwise. A bitter smile crossed my face. I'd been played, used, and discarded like nothing more than a tool. Emily had wanted the thrill of betrayal, the excitement of tearing down what we'd built. And Steve? He was just another accessory to her game, a partner in crime she'd probably toss aside the moment he was no longer useful. And here I was, left to pick up the pieces of a life I thought I understood but had clearly been lying to myself about all along. I took out my phone, scrolling through photos, our memories frozen in time. There was one of us on our anniversary last year, both smiling, arms wrapped around each other. I couldn't believe that only months later, that same woman had tried to destroy everything we shared. The betrayal wasn't just about her infidelity, it was about her cruelty, the way she'd taken pleasure in tearing down my life. I deleted the photo, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. She no longer had a place in my memories or my life. Just as I was ready to put my phone away, a notification lit up on the screen. It was a message from my best friend, Mike. I hadn't told him the whole story yet, but he knew something was wrong. He'd been there for me through thick and thin, and I knew he'd been waiting to hear how things had gone down tonight. With a shaky breath, I dialed his number, needing to hear a familiar voice, someone who would understand what I was going through. Nick? Mike's voice came through, filled with concern. What happened, man? Did you talk to her? I let out a hollow laugh. Talk to her? More like survive a standoff. Emily showed up with her boyfriend. And they had a gun, Mike. They were going to take everything. She had this whole twisted plan. There was a stunned silence on the other end, and then Mike let out a low whistle. I knew she was messed up, but, a gun? Are you all right? Yeah, I said, feeling a sense of calm as I recounted the events to someone who genuinely cared. I'm fine. And they're gone. The police took them away. I made sure they won't be able to come back. I had everything prepared for this. She thought she'd outsmarted me, but I was ready. Mike exhaled, the relief in his voice evident. Nick, I can't believe it. I mean, I knew she was distant, but I didn't think she was capable of something like this. You did the right thing, man. She wasn't worth it. And I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. His words hit a part of me that had been desperate for validation, for reassurance that I hadn't been completely blind, that this was her betrayal, not my failure. Thanks, Mike. I keep wondering how I missed it. How I didn't see this side of her sooner. Nick, don't beat yourself up over that, he replied firmly. People like her, they're experts at lying, at hiding who they really are. You trusted her, because that's what decent people do. You're not the one who's wrong here, she is. You deserve better. Hearing those words, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Mike was right. I'd been tricked, yes, but that didn't make me weak. If anything, I had emerged stronger, sharper, no longer willing to ignore the signs that people were using me. I'd been through fire tonight, but I'd come out the other side, and I wasn't about to look back. Thanks, Mike, I said, feeling the gratitude deep in my bones. I needed to hear that. We spoke for a few more minutes, Mike reassuring me that I'd get through this, that I had friends who cared, that I wasn't alone in facing this betrayal. After we hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was time to rebuild, time to let go of the past, of Emily and her lies, and move forward. Standing up, I walked through the house, my footsteps echoing softly in the empty space. It didn't feel so much like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a blank canvas, a place where I could start fresh, unburdened by the weight of a toxic relationship. There was no more need for deception, no more need to protect myself from someone who'd wanted to hurt me. I'd lost a lot tonight, but I'd gained something, too: clarity. I knew who I was, and I knew what I wanted. And as I looked around at the life I was now free to create on my own terms, I realized that Emily's betrayal had given me something unexpected, a second chance to build a life with real meaning, with people who truly cared. The house was quiet, but it was a quiet filled with promise. I knew that healing would take time, that there would be days when the bitterness resurfaced, memories that would sting. But tonight, I was ready to begin. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The days following the chaos brought a strange mix of relief and emptiness. Emily was gone, and the memories of her betrayal lingered like shadows, faint but unmistakable. I spent the first few days going through the house, removing every trace of her presence, anything that bore her mark, her influence. The wedding photos, the souvenirs from our trips, even her forgotten clothes in the closet, all of it went into boxes, things I planned to drop off at a donation center or throw away. I needed to clear the space, not just of her things but of the weight of her deception. With every item I put away, it felt like peeling off a layer of bitterness. It was strange, I thought I'd feel more regret or sorrow. But all I felt was a cold detachment, like packing away the life of a stranger. Emily had become someone I didn't recognize long before that night with the gun, but I had refused to see it. Now, looking back, the signs were so obvious. I'd been willingly blind, wanting to believe the best of her, seeing only what I hoped she was rather than what she'd shown me time and again. Clearing out the remnants of her life felt like purging a sickness from my home. With each item gone, the house felt less tainted, more like it was mine again. But even as I removed her things, I couldn't ignore the hollow spots left in their place. The emptiness was everywhere, a reminder that life as I knew it had been shattered. One evening, I took a quiet walk through the neighborhood, trying to clear my head. The cool night air was refreshing, a gentle balm on a soul still raw from betrayal. It was strange how different everything looked without her. I noticed things I'd missed before: the beauty of the trees lining the street, the smell of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. It felt like waking up after a long, strange dream, and in that quiet space, a small but steady feeling of hope began to emerge. A few days later, Mike dropped by, unannounced, with a six-pack of beer and a warm, reassuring smile. He walked in like he owned the place, tossing his jacket on the back of the couch and settling into the armchair with an easy familiarity that made me feel less alone. "Thought you could use some company," he said, cracking open a beer and handing it to me. "You doing all right?" I shrugged, taking a long sip. "Better than I thought I'd be. Clearing things out, getting my head straight. It's weirdly freeing." He nodded, looking around the now simpler living room, free of Emily's designer decorations and clutter. "Looks good, man. Like a new start." I laughed, feeling a bit of the tension ease. "That's the idea. I want to rebuild everything, make this place mine. It feels like I've been living under her shadow, her expectations, and now that she's gone, it's like I can finally breathe." Mike raised his bottle in a toast. "To new beginnings. And to never letting people like her darken your doorstep again." We clinked bottles, the simple sound of glass meeting glass echoing in the quiet room. It was the sound of moving forward, of putting the past behind. We spent the evening talking about everything and nothing, sharing laughs over old stories and avoiding the subject of Emily entirely. It was a relief, just having that friendship, that steady presence by my side, a reminder that life went on even after betrayal. The next day, with newfound resolve, I dove into something I'd put off for years, my own plans, dreams I'd sidelined for the sake of our marriage. Emily had always discouraged my ideas, subtly steering me toward her goals, her vision of what was respectable. She'd wanted a perfect, tidy life, where everything looked polished and predictable. And I, wanting to make her happy, had let myself be molded into that image. But now, with her gone, I felt a pull to rediscover who I was outside of her shadow. One of my passions had always been woodworking. I'd started as a kid, tinkering in my dad's garage, making little shelves and boxes, finding comfort in the solid, dependable feel of wood under my hands. Over the years, I'd dreamed of opening a workshop, building unique pieces, maybe even selling them one day. But Emily had dismissed it as hobbyist nonsense, convincing me to focus on the career path that made us more stable, more respectable. With her out of the picture, I realized there was nothing stopping me anymore. I spent the following week turning the spare room into a workshop, ordering supplies, and finally setting up the tools I'd stashed away in storage for years. The smell of wood, the weight of the tools in my hands, the sense of creating something tangible, it was exactly what I needed. As I worked on my first piece, a simple but elegant coffee table, I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't experienced in years. It was a reminder that my life didn't have to be defined by the ruins of my marriage. I could build something new, something solid, just like this table. Each cut, each joint, each careful sanding was a step toward reclaiming myself. That evening, I sat in my nearly finished workshop, the coffee table standing proudly in the center of the room. For the first time since everything had happened, I felt a deep, unshakable satisfaction. This was mine, built with my own hands, no interference, no expectations. It was a symbol of my new beginning, my commitment to living on my own terms. In the following days, I started sharing my work online, connecting with other woodworkers, and even taking on a few small projects. The response was overwhelming. Friends, strangers, even people I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, offering encouragement, asking about commissions. The workshop became a place of healing, a place where I could lose myself in the craft, where each completed project felt like a small victory. Through it all, Mike continued to check in, stopping by with coffee or dinner, offering his support without prying into details. He understood that I was moving on, rebuilding, and he respected the boundaries I'd set. His loyalty and friendship were reminders that not everyone was out to betray you, that there were people who truly cared, who would stand by you in the darkest times. One night, as we sat in the workshop, admiring the new pieces I'd finished, Mike looked over at me with a grin. "You're finally doing it, Nick. Living the life you always wanted." I nodded, a genuine smile breaking through. "Yeah, I am. And I'm not letting anyone take it away again." I knew there would still be tough days, memories that would resurface, moments of doubt. But for the first time, I felt confident in the path I was on. I was moving forward, reclaiming my life, my dreams, my freedom. Emily had tried to destroy everything, but in the end, her betrayal had only set me free. And with each day, each piece of wood carved into something beautiful, I was building a new life, one that no one could ever take from me again. Weeks turned into months, and life settled into a new rhythm. My workshop became a refuge, a place of purpose, where I could escape the shadows of betrayal and pour my energy into something meaningful. Orders started coming in steadily as people saw the pieces I posted online. Each project, each finished piece, was a reminder that I was no longer living for anyone else's expectations. I was creating something from the ground up, crafting my future with my own two hands. On an unusually quiet Sunday morning, I decided to finally tackle a project that had been in the back of my mind for weeks, transforming the master bedroom. Emily had always insisted on a minimalist, sterile look, free of color and personality. She'd wanted everything to be picture perfect, but I was tired of living in a room that felt like a showroom instead of a sanctuary. I wanted something different now, a space that felt like me, a place I could truly call my own. I started with the walls, painting over the cold, muted colors Emily had chosen with a rich, warm shade that made the room feel alive, vibrant. I added shelves I'd made myself, adorned with things that meant something to me, photos with friends, a few quirky trinkets from my travels, books that had been collecting dust. By the end of the weekend, the room looked nothing like it had before. It was simple, comfortable, a space that felt like home. And as I stepped back to admire my work, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. Mike noticed the change in me, too. One night, he invited me out for drinks, dragging me out of my comfortable solitude with a grin and a promise of a good time. At first, I resisted. Socializing felt like the last thing I wanted. But I knew he was right. I couldn't hide in my workshop forever, no matter how comforting it felt. We went to a lively bar downtown, the kind of place I hadn't stepped foot in since my 20s. It was bustling, filled with music and laughter, a stark contrast to the quiet solitude I'd wrapped myself in. But I realized that I needed this, a night out, a reminder that there was a world beyond the walls I'd built around myself. As we talked and laughed over drinks, I felt a shift. I could finally talk about what had happened without feeling the bitterness or shame that had once gripped me. I told Mike about the plans I had for the workshop, the new ideas brewing in my mind, and he listened with genuine excitement, proud of how far I'd come. Being surrounded by people, hearing their stories, sharing my own, reminded me that life was still full of possibilities. Then, as I was getting ready to call it a night, someone approached me. Her name was Rachel, a friend of Mike's I vaguely remembered meeting once at a party. She had an easy smile, one that wasn't weighed down by expectations or hidden agendas. We chatted casually, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no pressure, no need to impress or perform. She asked about my woodworking, genuinely interested, and as I talked about my passion, I saw the kindness and understanding in her eyes. Over the next few weeks, Rachel and I started seeing each other occasionally, in the quiet, unhurried way of two people who weren't looking for anything complicated. She was understanding, respectful of my boundaries, and as time went on, I felt myself opening up more. We shared long conversations about life, about dreams and disappointments, and in her, I found a friend, a connection that was unburdened by the weight of my past. One afternoon, she came by the workshop, curious to see my latest project. As she watched me work, her questions were thoughtful, her appreciation for the craft genuine. She admired my creations not as possessions but as expressions of something deeper, something meaningful. And in those moments, I felt a peace I hadn't realized I was searching for, a quiet companionship that felt like healing. Yet, there were days when the memories of Emily's betrayal still haunted me, lingering like echoes in the background. But with Rachel, I felt a quiet reassurance, a reminder that not everyone was out to hurt or use me. In her presence, I was free to just be, to let my guard down without fear. We laughed together, shared simple moments, and in those moments, I felt the wounds of the past slowly closing, making way for something new. As the weeks went on, I started to think about the future in a way that I hadn't before. The workshop was thriving, my life was filled with projects and plans, and with each day, I was discovering new pieces of myself, pieces that I had lost, neglected, or forgotten. I was rediscovering dreams that I'd pushed aside, building a life that was finally mine, untethered from anyone else's control. One day, Rachel joined me at the workshop again, this time with her own small idea in mind. She wanted a custom shelf for her apartment, something unique, something Nick-made, as she put it. I couldn't help but smile at the request, feeling a warm sense of pride as I sketched out the design with her, incorporating her ideas, bringing something she imagined to life. Working together, side by side, was a quiet joy that I cherished more than I could put into words. When the piece was finished, and I helped her mount it in her apartment, she stood back, admiring it with a satisfied smile. "You know," she said, glancing over at me, "you've got a real gift, Nick. You don't just build furniture. You create things that make a space feel like home." Her words struck something deep within me. "Thanks, Rachel," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I guess I finally feel like I'm building a home for myself, too." We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set outside her window, the warm glow casting a golden light over the room. I realized, in that moment, that I had rebuilt not just my house, not just my business, but myself. I'd taken the shattered pieces of my life and reshaped them into something strong, something real. As I headed home that night, I knew that I was no longer haunted by the betrayal that had once threatened to consume me. I was free, truly free, to live a life of my own making, surrounded by people who saw and valued me for who I truly was. Emily had tried to take everything, but in doing so, she'd given me a priceless gift, the chance to start over, to rebuild with purpose and strength. I didn't know where the future would lead, but I felt ready to embrace it, step by step. This time, I would guard my life with the wisdom I'd earned, building a future on my own terms, filled with people and things that truly mattered. Months passed, and with each new project and each meaningful connection, I felt the pieces of my life settling into place, forming a foundation stronger than before. The workshop had become more than just a source of income, it was a sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the steady, rhythmic work of crafting, sanding, and assembling each piece with intention and pride. Every project I completed was a reminder that I had overcome, that I was more than the betrayal that had once defined me. One day, a small family-owned furniture store reached out, interested in carrying my pieces exclusively. The offer felt like the final stamp of validation, proof that I was building something valuable, something truly my own. I accepted eagerly, and soon enough, my designs were featured in their storefront, a humble but significant achievement that filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't anticipated. Rachel continued to be a steady presence in my life, our friendship deepening as the days went by. We kept things simple, enjoying the slow, natural development of our bond. She never pushed, never demanded, understanding without words that I was still learning to trust again, still healing from the scars Emily had left behind. Her patience was a gift, allowing me to move at my own pace, to rebuild not just my life but my heart. One evening, I invited Rachel over for dinner, wanting to celebrate the recent partnership with the furniture store. I cooked a simple meal, nothing extravagant, just a home-cooked dinner in a house that finally felt like mine. As we sat together, eating and laughing in the warm light of my newly decorated dining room, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. It was a small, quiet moment, but it held a depth that went beyond words. I was surrounded by peace, companionship, and a future that I was excited to explore. As we finished dinner, Rachel looked around the house, her eyes landing on one of the larger pieces I'd recently completed, a sturdy bookshelf, designed with intricate, hand-carved details. She walked over, running her fingers along the smooth wood, and turned back to me with a warm smile. "You've created something beautiful here, Nick," she said softly. "It's not just furniture. It's like, you've built a home for yourself from the ground up. You should be proud." Her words struck a chord deep within me, and I felt my throat tighten with emotion. I looked around the room, taking in the changes I'd made, each piece of furniture, each decoration a reflection of the life I was building, free of anyone else's influence or expectations. It was a home that finally felt like an extension of myself, strong, resilient, and authentic. "Thank you, Rachel," I replied, my voice thick with gratitude. "I think, for the first time in a long time, I really am proud. Proud that I could turn things around, that I could make something good out of the mess I was handed." She nodded, understanding shining in her eyes. "You did more than that. You showed that you're stronger than anything that tried to break you." Later that night, as we sat on the porch with a couple of glasses of wine, watching the stars, Rachel turned to me with a thoughtful look. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" she asked gently, not pushing, just curious. The question hung in the air, and I thought about it for a long time. Forgiveness was something I hadn't allowed myself to consider. I had been too focused on rebuilding, on moving forward. But in that quiet moment, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about letting Emily off the hook. It was about freeing myself from the last traces of bitterness, about unburdening my heart from the anger I'd carried for so long. Maybe, I said finally, taking a deep breath. Not because she deserves it, but because I do. I deserve to be free from the weight of it all. She's a part of my past, but that's all she'll ever be. I don't want her betrayal to be a part of my future. Rachel nodded, her gaze filled with approval and understanding. That's powerful, Nick. And you're right. You deserve peace. We sat in silence for a while after that, just watching the stars. It felt like I had finally closed a chapter, letting go of the last threads of hurt and resentment that had lingered. In forgiving Emily, I wasn't excusing her actions or minimizing the damage she had caused, I was simply refusing to let her control my story any longer. As the days turned into weeks, I embraced my new life with a renewed sense of purpose. I dedicated myself to my work, expanding my client base, collaborating with other artisans, and even planning a small gallery showcase of my pieces. Each new opportunity was a reminder that I was capable of creating something meaningful, something lasting, all on my own terms. Rachel and I continued to grow closer, our friendship evolving into something deeper, richer. She was a steady presence, encouraging me to dream bigger, to let myself experience joy without hesitation. And I, in turn, found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't thought possible. She knew my scars, knew the story behind each one, yet never looked at me as broken or damaged. With her, I felt whole, grounded, seen. One evening, as we were finishing up a walk by the river, Rachel took my hand, her gaze warm and steady. "Nick, I want you to know something," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "You've shown me what true resilience looks like. You've taken something painful, something most people would let destroy them, and you've turned it into strength. I'm proud of you." I squeezed her hand, a wave of emotion washing over me. "Thank you, Rachel. I don't know where I'd be without you. You've helped me see that there's life beyond all of this, that there's more to look forward to." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder as we watched the sun set over the river. It was a quiet, unassuming moment, but in that simplicity, I felt a peace I hadn't thought possible. Emily's betrayal had once been a wound that I thought would never heal, a scar that I'd carry forever. But now, it was just a memory, a part of my story but not the defining chapter. As we headed back to my house, hand in hand, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, for the pain that had pushed me to grow, for the resilience I had discovered within myself, and for the people who had been there for me when I needed them most. Life had thrown me into darkness, but I had clawed my way back into the light, stronger and wiser than before. Stepping through the door of my home, I felt a wave of contentment. This was my life, my future, and every piece of it had been rebuilt with purpose and integrity. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them, armed with the knowledge that I could overcome whatever came my way. I looked over at Rachel, her presence a reassuring warmth beside me, and I knew I was no longer alone. I had let go of the past, embraced the present, and was ready to welcome whatever the future held. Betrayal might have broken me once, but I had risen from it with strength, with resilience, and with an unwavering commitment to live a life of my own making.